having encountered me in the hallway, and he would frown as though he had come across some midget stranger rather than an emanation of his own flesh and blood. My father would peer and squint at me, as though he was not quite sure what I was. Then, as the silence between us unfolded, he would manage a brief, mumbled question. Have you done your homework? Have you finished your chores? As a 5-year-old, I had no homework to speak of, but I would nod my head furiously, for it was in my mind that if I didn't acquiesce, I might well be expelled from the apartment that same night. Nothing my parents ever told me, by the way, had in the least bit implied I might be ejected from the family home for failing to complete the non-existent homework my father was so concerned I finish. But somehow I'd got it into my head that such a thing could happen. It was one of the many fears I had. Looking back, I think my father was as terrified of encountering me as I was of him. So he said the first thing that came into his head. He was an academic, a cartographer in fact. He worked with maps and geology, a rather nondescript occupation, perfectly suited to the precise and harmless man that he was. And yet, he and people like him had been subject to persecution during Mao's Cultural Revolution. A good number of teachers, technicians, and intellectuals lost their lives as a result of being branded bourgeois degenerates, and I suppose the fear and uncertainty he inherited from that period never left him. It crossed into every element of his life, even his relationship with his daughter. I grew up in the aftermath of Maoism, after the death of the great helmsman, so that fear wasn't real to me, at least, not until the events which took place some 15 years later. But my father was never able to step out from that fear, from its shadow. Perhaps my father alleviated that fear by allowing himself to grow faint, to retreat into the vague and abstract world of the graphs and charts that populated his study, a place where he would not be bothered by the hectic messiness of family life, the dirty diapers and detritus of toys strewn across the carpet, the bawling loudness of a toddler's tantrums, the slickness of small upturned faces, both expectant and outraged, lathered with snot and tears. My mother handled her fears in a different way. She was hands-on, seeking to police every aspect and inflection of her family's life. She'd make sure we were all gathered around the table at precisely 6, that the napkins we used were open on our laps. During the meal itself, we would be informed of the goings-on of our neighbors who lived on our landing, of the achievements they had laid claim to, and the scandals which took place behind closed doors. Most of all, the scandals. My mother was possessed of a shrill energy, like a tsunami. It could batter and overwhelm any structure that stood in its way. Local gossip was something she used to set herself in motion, to make sure we were all fed and watered, that our clothes were clean, and our respective paths in life were cleared. It wasn't until much later that I realized this, however. At the time, she just seemed oppressive and annoying. At the tail end of the Cultural Revolution, my father had been demoted, but had managed to survive. He had been incarcerated for a short period, but returned to full employment. He was, I suppose, one of the lucky ones. To this day, I don't know what indignities, or worse, he suffered. It was something he would never have considered disclosing to his family, especially a family of women. My mother, however, was convinced that the source of his woes, the source of all our woes, was simply a random error on the part of an otherwise flawless bureaucratic machine. For her, the government was hard at times, but fair, and its authority and power had always worked in the best interests of the people themselves. As a child, I shared my mother's belief that the Chinese government was best, that it was ahead, in every respect, of the Western imperialist powers that sought to do it down. Every radio broadcast suggested that we, the Chinese people, were the flag bearers of humanity as it entered a more humane and free classless society. Such things we imbibed from an early age in the same way the children of America stood to attention each morning at school, in order to pledge allegiance to their flag. But again, looking back,